Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host Rich Gear here, as usual, and we have one of our favorite guys that we've interviewed, been on a show many times, but he's a prolific author, and he's not here, of course. We're going to review a book of his. Doug has been reading it, called Censoring the Darwin Skeptics. Yeah, you want to hold that book up there?
That's what it looks like.
Yep.
And this is the third of a series. It's actually a trilogy, and these are fairly thick books about
they are tomes.
The problems that people who are skeptical of Darwinian theory go through because they're being marginalized by the prominent paradigm in the scientific community.
Yeah, and we have reviewed those other two books as well. Doug, you want to tell them what they are?
Okay, the first one we did a review of Slaughter of the Dissidents quite a while ago.
Yeah, good book.
That was the first one in the series. The second one was called Silencing the Darwin Skeptics, and this one's called Censoring the Darwin Skeptics. And this is something that Jerry's been working on for probably 25 years or more.
Dr. Jerry Bergman, yes, he's an amazing guy.
He's been cranking out these books at a rate of maybe one every 3 months now.
It's just unbelievable.
It's really interesting to see the production that he's done in terms of writing books about the creation movement and the different people in it. And there's a lot of different things that are occurring in the scientific community, and there's a massive effort that's going on with the Darwinists to silence those people who disagree with them.
It's very interesting that we sort of live in a world where certain people in the elite establishment seem to be thinking the best way to do it is going back to the old dictatorial way of doing things, and that's censoring stuff. The stuff that we spent almost the whole 20th century and definitely the 1700s, our whole country trying to do away with censorship. And it reminds me of the old adage, be careful about people who are not in power, because when they get in power, they tend to be worse than the people who were in power in the first place. Mm-hmm. I guess my analogy would be, Doug, the people who hated the French aristocracy in the late 1700s, and then they got rid of them and killed hundreds of thousands of people on the guillotine. I see that in the political environment today. If you don't fit a certain mindset, you're going to be knocked off and censored. And Doug, it's interesting how the evolution stuff, it's the same thing, and it's a few people in the elite area, and the people who are in the halls of power, who basically might at one time might have been fair-minded, make no pretense even now of being fair-minded. And so that's what Jerry is coming up with as his book, apparently. Well, if this third tome, I have not read this book, Truth of Information. I have not read this book yet. It just came out recently, right?
It just came out this last summer.
Last summer. So, but I assume like the first two, it is copiously footnoted, and he gives equal time. He quotes everyone, even people who you would not consider to be pro creation. They would be more evolutionary or Darwinian in nature, but even he'll use them and quote them verbatim, and the notes are incredibly detailed. Yeah, that's the word I'm getting for. Yeah.
But what I did was I wrote a review of this book on Amazon.com, and what I wrote about it was that a little bit of our experience of censorship, because many years ago I was investigating the possibility of evolution happening from the chemistry of life.
Oh yeah.
And I was trying to find out if amino acids could combine to produce proteins, and I followed the chemistry of this quite a bit. And
apparently, Doug, you're not the only one that's done this. I got those videos I bought down from Answers in Genesis. We went down there. Dr. George approved them, and at least makes mention of they found that brown sticky goo just like you did. And so they're trying to convert amino acids into proteins by zapping it a little bit longer or doing a little bit more. But anyway, continue.
The thing was that the process stops that when you're trying to remove a water molecule to form the peptide bond. And so if you have an environment that has a lot of water in it, then you've got an issue that you need water for the life to evolve, but you can't have water for the protein bond to...
It's like everything else with life.
So it takes a very special set of chemical circumstances to form this peptide bond, except if it's already done in life. If there's already the mechanism to manufacture it within a living cell, that's where all the enzymes and proteins and everything like that come together to produce enzymes and proteins.
Because what you're saying, just like everything else, like I say, you can't get DNA without protein, you can't get protein without DNA, so which comes first? Well, you can't get any of the proteins, you can't get it without water, yet there has to be water for it to happen. So unless everything worked, nothing worked. Doug, the problem comes with all evolutionary scenarios is they demand spontaneous generation,
right,
which has been disproven by every scientific experiment you've ever used. Whether it's macro or micro, it's all been generation. The flies don't come from maggots don't come from rotten meat. Bacteria doesn't come from non-bacteria. It doesn't happen unless there's some program already in existence that screams designer. I mean, there's design here. Elements here.
What the evolutionists say is that, well, this is not evolution. That's something.
I'm sorry, but to get evolution, you have to have that happen.
Yeah, of course.
That's those lying sacks of you know what else. You know, they're just liars.
This is where I'm finding out, and anyone who studies this quite intensively finds out that if you start raising these questions, pretty soon you're put on a blacklist. And this blacklist starts growing. If you are on the blacklist and you can't publish, and they'll do a search of the author on the internet or whatever that, and if they published anything contrary to Darwinian evolution, well, then they won't publish you. And so
and then of course they'll tell you, this guy's not a peer-reviewed author.
Right. That's
the catch-22. This is the problem, the problem, if you will, of people who are, I think, pretty much evil. Okay.
Right.
At best they're deceived. At worst they're evil, or they're both, because you cannot. Science is supposedly self-correcting. It's supposedly willing to take new information when it comes up, adjust, and that seems to be true, except when it comes to this. That's why it begs the question, Doug. This is really a secular religion. Darwinian evolution is a secular religion. What's really so disheartening, Doug, is that so many people who are not against a theistic approach to life, that is Christians and things, still oftentimes promote evolution, trying to put their foot in both camps. It really makes the work much harder. If you had really two lines of demarcation where you really knew which camp you were in, but you get these people who are, I call them quislings, because they studied on the river, and there's a lot of Christian colleges and universities that have compromised, and because Christians by and large do not want confrontation.
Right.
But Jesus said, look, I came to bring a sword. You're going to cause confrontation. It's going to happen because people hate what you stand for. You can't just get along with it. Can we all just get along? The answer is no. You know one of the stupidest things I've ever seen, Doug? It's that bumper sticker that says coexist on the back of it. What a stupid, asinine bumper sticker. It's got all the different symbols of all the different religions, from Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, and Islam. I said, no, some of those religions want to exterminate you. I said, and if you want to say, can we coexist? De facto, we do coexist. We live side by side. But what you really mean is can't all get along. And the answer is no. And the people who are in the ascendant of evolution, Doug, know this, and that's why they censor. That's why they do what they do. They know that if the chicken gets out of the coop, if people are going to look at it and say, what the heck? I have been blindsided.
It's really impossible for these people who call themselves tolerant to be tolerant.
Well, yeah, but Doug, you know how they make excuses. This is amazing how they stack the deck. They go, well, it's okay to be intolerant of things that by very nature are intolerant themselves, i.e. Christianity.
Yeah.
Okay, what I'm saying is this is how they set the rules up. It's like, are you kidding me? You make these definitions that aren't anyway rational at all, but that's what they do. And people buy into these kind of this cock and bull stories. But anyway,
so it's interesting. We had an incident happen to us when we put on a seminar at the.
Yeah, talk about that, Doug. I didn't remember that.
This was the Creation Summit thing where we had sponsors from the university set up with the rooms.
Right.
At the,
this is what, 2 summers ago?
Well, this was several years ago.
Has it been that long?
3 or 4 years ago, anyway.
Yeah, 3 or 4 maybe. I know. Yeah, I guess it is.
What happened with this is that we started putting out some information about it, especially since one of the speakers, Dr. John Sanford, was going to talk about Lenski's continuous experiment of E. coli. Breeding it for many successive generations. It's been going on for about 40 years or something.
Wow.
Like that. And so, and the upshot of it is that there's really nothing very much evolutionary going on. Still got E. coli getting bred in these things.
So it's still E. coli, not F. coli,
right.
Or G. coli.
Correct. The biggest thing was that there was a little bit of changes in terms of it being able to stand being in a citrate solution.
Okay.
And so they figured out, well, the types of E. coli that could not survive in the citrate died out, and the strains that could survive it survived. And so, this is really what you call natural selection of a sort, but it's not evolution. It isn't because you have citrate in there that it's creating something genetically to be able to consume citrate.
Usually what we find out with stuff like that is certain things, certain genetic things will get activated or that may not have been active before, and those that have that genetic ability to activate, they do better. That's not really evolution. That's variation, or if you will, natural selection. But it's like how many you go into 100 different things. Doug, we've talked. Human beings that do better in subtropical environments generally are darker skinned, because they don't get messed up. Lighter skin on the other one, so that's nothing new.
Some of the professors out there found out about what we were going to be doing, and they tried to shut the conference down.
See, I didn't realize that. I'd forgotten that,
And it turned out that they went to somebody in the administration to try to shut it down. They were told that they're supposed to allow free speech on the campus. However, what they did was they spread the rumor that it was being shut down. And so that's why, we didn't end up with a big audience, it was because of that.
How did you find out? I didn't realize that.
Yeah, it's actually something that was in the state news that spread that rumor.
Really?
And so
okay.
That's how I understood. I didn't see this, so I can't verify that with what was in my own eyes, but I think that's what I heard, is that somebody published that they were shutting down this conference, and so that was kind of interesting, and so it kind of ruined the conference. And then we had a bunch of people show up that were from BioLogos.
Oh, yeah, I remember those guys. Yeah.
And so they were standing out in the hallway, and the BioLogos is a theistic evolution group.
Right.
And
it's, what's his name,
Francis Collins.
Yeah.
And, they're ostensibly Christians, But they're the ones who are your Quizlings, the ones who really are believers in evolution, and they're not really, they don't like the idea that we are actually promoting a strictly literal Genesis.
The straightforward interpretation of the book of Genesis is pretty much the way it's always been done until Darwin came across. Well, slightly earlier than that, you had the Great Chain of Being and some things of that in the late 1700s, maybe even a little bit earlier, but not much earlier than that. Before that, it was all pretty much, you read Genesis, it was a straightforward narrative, and when you read it, it comes across, it's not written as poetry, it's not written as allegory, it's not written as symbolism, it's not written as one day equals an age, or this is just a type of a person, you know. It's meant, these are like real people, they did real things. And so yeah, and to me, they're Quizlings. They basically sell you out and try to put your foot in both camps. And I've watched it, I go, and you know, the thing is, I won't deny the fact that they're Christians, but they're deceived really badly, and they do damage to the kingdom of God, because I tell people this oftentimes from a Christian viewpoint. If you're an atheist, an unbeliever, a rationalist, okay, this is not for you. But but the non-believers understand this very well. That's why they censor creationists so much, because if you show that really young Earth creation, which is quite the straightforwardly, that's what it would be. The world was only about 6,000 years old, okay? The idea that if you had death and suffering and killing and disease and all kind of thorns and thistles for millions of years, you've negated the work of Jesus Christ. What do I mean by that? It's the idea that if Jesus came to undo the effects of the curse, which is physical death, the curse on the plants, the curse on the beasts of the field, the entire universe, according to Paul, was subjected to futility because of the sin of Adam and Eve, of which we are all descended from. So if that did not happen, if Adam and Eve were metaphorical people, and there was death and suffering for millions of years before Adam and Eve came on, then Christ never needed to come. And this is what they don't understand.
If you don't believe the words of Moses, how can you believe me?
So I think that the people who are Darwin, these people are maybe evil people, but at least I understand them. They are straightforward atheists, okay? They're hostile to God. What really bothers me is people, it's kind of like the Pharisees who hung Jesus. You know, they're supposed to be on his side. Right. And they were his biggest enemies. And sometimes, I hate to tell you, people in the church, be aware, because sometimes your friend is not your friend, and that's the real problem with it. But at least these people, you can go at them, you can fight them straightforward battle. We know what these people are, and they're hostile to Christianity. What really gets me is why a Christian would get in bed with these same people. I never would understand that.
Well, I would find he first talks about censorship in the libraries, in the bookstores,
okay,
and in publishing per se. You know, where if somebody donates a creationist book to the library or the university, well, eventually it never finds itself on the bookshelf.
It never does, yeah.
There's a number of universities that used to subscribe to the Creation Research Society quarterly. But as soon as the subscription ran out, they would set it aside and not do anything with it. And then you'd have people who sort of sit on the editorial boards of the various magazines. You know, the accusation is that creationists don't publish in peer-reviewed journals. Well, we have our own peer-reviewed journals that we publish in, but the whole idea is that, if you can't really get your stuff past the censors in Nature or in PNAS or in other publications that are sort of like the standard things like that. Then you have teachers who get censored. You know, they're told they're not to talk about this in their classroom.
See, I remember, Doug, when Young Earth Creation was kind of, I would say, the modern movement with Henry Morris and and those folks back in the late '60s, early '70s, it still was unknown. Of course, they didn't take you seriously enough because they didn't think you had no evidence. And then I still remember going into a classroom at high school, and I remember the teacher saying, "Man, I've been blindsided. He had never heard any of this stuff." I remember this at work when people were shocked that I was a young Earth creation guy, and they go, "What?" And then I go, "Because," and the advantage I had because I was doing my art and I had a good they knew I wasn't a stupid guy, and they knew I could create, and so they were able to listen to a few things, and they go, "I never heard any of this stuff before," and so often. That's why things don't get heard, is because they're restricted, and Jerry documents that quite effectively, I think,
Well, what I also found is that there's even this type of censorship in Christian bookstores.
Oh, is that right? Yeah, I wouldn't.
Christian bookstores, because it's very difficult to find a creationist book in the Christian bookstore. And, I find that sad, is that, the people who...
Used to find them all the time.
Right, but what's going on is that some of the Christian bookstores are owned by bigger...
Oh, yeah, that's true. I know, Zondervan got bought out by... Who did they get bought out by? Yeah.
Yeah, the bigger publishing company. And so it's not as easy to get published. It's not... however, there are... like Ken Hanlon's organization and a few other organizations have their own publishing houses, and so there is...
It's had to happen that way because they've driven you... It's, that reminds you of what the schools have gotten such a bad... I'm talking about... It's a side, like a sidebar, but it's a corollary. Gotten so bad in so many places. The homeschool movement has taken off hugely because of it. Yeah. Because you've had people will go to where they get a product that's superior. And I tell you that the creationist books are very good. I mean, not all of them are great, but there's a lot of really good information out there. And as I say, Jerry, this guy, he's got nine postgraduate degrees. I mean, and that doesn't mean he's a genius, but he's a genius. This guy, he's written, how many books has he written, Doug? About 50 books?
Yeah, it's getting close.
It's unbelievable. And like you say, he's really writing. It's getting faster and faster, the output. I mean, for a while it might be a year or 2 years between a publication. Like you say, what, Doug, every 3 months he's getting a book coming out? I swear it is. It's incredible. And it's good stuff.
Yeah, one thing that I found that was interesting about a chapter here, it says censorship of verbiage implying design and purpose. And what's happened is that for many years the evolutionists in their literature would talk about design in their writings. They talk about this is designed, and they would say the chemistry of life is astounding to everyone, but this should not be misrepresented as support for the idea of life's molecular complexity as the result of intelligent design. To the contrary, modern scientific views of the molecular organization of life are entirely consistent with spontaneous variation and natural selection to driving a powerful evolutionary process. Because intelligent design theories are based on supernatural explanations that can have nothing to do with science.
Yeah.
And so that's what there are things.
I tell you, Pasteur would have been horrified at that statement. So would, I think, Isaac Newton, so would Kepler. They would have been horrified at those kinds of statements,
But they can't avoid terms such as learned or purpose or design or invention or molecular machine or gatekeeper or things like this that are...
Doug, we should have an expression, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it probably is a duck, I mean, that's the thing is, and if it looks like it's designed, acts like it's designed, shows purpose in design, it's probably designed. Probably had a designer, But
so they're trying to self-censor themselves when they're publishing things to not use terms that are anthropomorphic.
Anthropomorphic, yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting thing that they're doing. He talks also about the case of Mark Armitage.
Oh, that's a disgrace.
Yeah, what happened with him was that he made this find of a triceratops horn, one of the biggest ones that they've been able to find in the Hell Creek Formation in
Right.
Montana. And so he was looking at this horn and the insides of it, and he was finding all the soft tissue and being able to extract it and examine it under the electron microscope. And he published the results of this in a peer-reviewed scientific journal and got accepted. And then his employer, which is in Northridge, California State University, got wind of this, and he said, and they told him point blank to his face, we do not tolerate your religion in this university. You know, using those words. And so, and they fired him basically at will.
Yep.
And told him to get his electron microscope out there, and he was managing all the entire electron microscope lab at this university. Well, he took them to court and was able to actually win a case here.
Okay.
Actually to get his retirement and compensation, but the issue there was that he was in effect silenced in his scientific efforts to
And this has been going on for years. The guy, Scientific American, was fired because he wrote a creation. He came out of the class.
Forrest Mims, yeah.
Forrest Mims, yeah.
His account is in this book as well.
It's unbelievable. The censorship, it's just diabolical, and it's really wicked. But then again, you know, if they don't believe in a God, who's to say what's wicked or not wicked anymore, you know?
Well, they'll be held accountable for everything that they're doing because, you know, God doesn't overlook this stuff.
Yeah.
And, I think at a certain point in time, it's going to be so obvious that the science supports the creation movement and actually supports the young Earth creation movement.
Oh, yeah.
That the judgment will be coming just by...
See, the thing is, there's no shame in being ignorant, Doug, but they are willingly ignorant, willfully ignorant, Doug. This is the crime. This is the deceit.
And we'll see you next time on Revolution Against the